David Rambam for Wednesday, Tes Kislev Tavshin Pei Aleph, the first Perek Rishon of Hilchos Eiruvin. So today we continue from Hilchos Eiruvin, Hilchos Shabbos to Hilchos Eiruvin. And in this part we're going to focus on the basics of what it is, to how it is, to what an Erev Chatzeros is, how you do it, what it's like. And you have to keep in mind that a number of the details that are related to the subject were already explained in Hilchos Shabbos itself, Shuyos and things like that. So Hilchos Eiruvin mitzvah say achas v'him divrei seifrim ve'enim min haminyan. So this whole these prakim are all based on one mitzvah, which is not even one of the 613. It's midrabanan. Ubir mitzvah zuba prakim elu, and it shall be explained in these chapters. Perek Rishon, and the Rambam begins in Halacha Aleph by telling us that min haTorah there actually is no such thing as an erev. So Halacha Aleph chatzah sheyesh bo shchenim harbe. If you have a yard with a number of neighbors, a number of adjacent houses sharing a yard, everyone has their own home. So midiraisa, they should all be allowed to carry as they wish throughout the yard, from the homes to the yard, and from the yard to the homes. Because it's all one big rishus hayachid, and you can carry throughout one big rishus hayachid. Not only a chatzer, which has a number of homes, but v'chein adin b'mavai, a mavai which itself has a number of chatzeros, each connecting and branching into the mavai. Mavai sheyesh l'lechi kaira, as we already explained in Hilchos Shabbos, in order to carry there, you do need a lechi or a kaira for the fourth side. We discussed the mavai mafulush, the mavai she'enim mafulush. But assuming that you were able to carry their mitzvah, that as long as you took care of that, so then shiyu kol b'nei hamavim mitornan tal tebekulis. Then I did. Originally, everyone from that shares the entire mavim can carry throughout. Umei chatzeros lamavim, and from the yards to the mavim, mavim lachatzeros, and from the mavim back to the yards. Shekol mavim rishus hayachidu, again, same principle, same idea. V'chein adin b'medina, shi mukafes choyma gavaya asar tefachim sheish lo d'lasas in olis balayla. And if you had a whole city that has a wall that's at least 10 tefachim high, and it has doors that are closed at night, that whole subject of an Erev in the city, so assuming that the Erev is good, assuming what we call it an Erev, but assuming that the mechitzas are good, so then there would be no further need for creating an Erev specifically. Shekula rishus hayachid, it already is entirely one big rishus hayachid. Zeh din Torah, that's all midiraisa. However, the Rambam continues in Halacha Beis, Avam divrei seifrim, but midrabanan also l'shchenim l'taltel b'rishus hayachid sheyesh b'chaluka b'diyurin. So midrabanan, the neighbors are not allowed to carry in a rishus hayachid that has different people living in different places. Achi arvu kol hashchenim kulam erev Shabbos, until all the neighbors in advance before Shabbos create some kind of erev, some kind of combination. The Rambam is going to describe later what exactly that is, but right now we're already using the term, they're being ma'arev. Whether on the smaller chatzer level, or on the greater maveh level, or even for an entire city, you would have to make one grand erev chatzeros for the whole city. And this is the takana that we attribute to Shleima and his beis din.
What's the problem?
What's the problem? The Rambam is going to explain the problem. Why do we need this in Halacha Dalet? But before we get to Halacha Dalet, we're going to do Halacha Gimel. This is not just permanent housing, but even if you have temporary housings, you have tents, you have huts, you have an encampment that has a mechitza around it, so you have that in place, you still have this problem. And according to this takana, according to this rule, you would even need an erev for this kind of temporary encampment or enclosure.
A trailer park.
Trailer park. Well, those are perhaps more permanent.
Camping on Shabbos.
Yeah.
They put up an island.
Yeah.
You also have trailer parks.
Right.
That's more like houses.
Right. However, there is an exception. What is the exception? But if you have a caravan that put up a mechitza, there's no need for an additional erev. You can carry from 10 to 10 without an erev, because in a certain sense, an erev is combining, and they are already all erev. They're already combined.
So you have 5 mobile homes, so to speak, that driving somewhere for Shabbos and they park together. They could carry. Or without Eiruvin?
Well, at least the way the Rambam says it now, that these are not set for them. So it sounds like they're all sort of sharing. It's like one general shared space in some sense. So perhaps let's see how the Maggid Mishnah elaborates a little bit on this. Maggid Mishnah says, so really the Rambam didn't fully define the difference between the din and the reisha, where you need a mechitza and a machana, and a shayara. What's the difference between a machana and a shayara exactly? So Maggid Mishnah says a machana means that they're in one place for a number of days. That's a machana. So they need an eruv. A shayara is constantly on the move. If they're resting, it's temporary, not more than a few hours, and then they're on their way. So that's the idea. That's how he understands it. That kavu and lahen means that the oilim themselves, the tents themselves, are not kavu. The tents themselves don't really have a significance of as an entity at all. This is Plainy's tent. It's barely an entity. They're moving. And he says this is Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that olam shebamachane tzrich an erev shebashayara ein tzrich an erev. So the Rambam is going with this Yerushalmi. However, if you look in Hilchos Malachim and L'chamei and fast forward all the way to the end of the Rambam, Perek Shishi, he quotes, the Rambam says, Malachim relating to war, that if you're in a military encampment, if you're in a machana, they're putter for making an erev chatzeres. So he says, "Ain't steer of divrei Rabbeinu." Don't ask me what steer here. He said machana. He said because that's a specific. It's a machana ha'hoylech lamuchama. People who are in a war. That's the context is that they have special hetedim. The other,
like a shayara, because they're especially in war, they're moving. They're not sitting there.
We're assuming that they do military encampments do settle down in one place. They're not always on the move. They reach a certain destination. They're set up. So there are chaynim yomim, but why are they chaynim yomim? Still, this chaynim lehilachim. It's all for the purpose of battling, and there's a special kula for the military. Other kulas, I believe, as well. But the Yerushalmi said a machana meant a normal machana, so that's the difference. So machana is one din, shayar is another din. In machana itself, if it's the military, then it's a different halacha. That's how he wants to explain. However, there are other mafarshim who say that they don't think the Yerushalmi is correct. That the Sefta says it the opposite. That in a machana you're potter, in a shayara you're chayev, and the Yerushalmi has it backwards. And how do they understand? Why would a machana be potter and a shayara would be chayev? They understand the definition of machana shayara differently. They said a machana has 10 people. Because there's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim where it talks about David going to war, and it says that his men came to help him. Ad lemachana gadol kemachana elikim. Machana elikim is 10. A minyan, I guess, is 10. So a machana is 10. Pachas mikein shayara. So somehow that's how they understand that less than 10 is chai, more than 10 is pater. Doesn't give any further explanation. But however, according to them, there's no difference between a machana that's going to war and a machana that's not going to war. Because the machana that they use to explain the Sefta and the Yerushalmi is talking about a machana of war. So they're saying it's all one big din of machana. Because from the Mishnah, it sounds like Dafka, those going to war have a special heter that people in an identical circumstance who weren't going to war don't have. So that's why he prefers the Rambam's Gersa and the Rambam's approach. That way there's a specific difference between going to war and not going to war. And the machna is chayev except for war. That's how the Maggid Mishnah makes a seder in halacha gimel. Now, why? Why do we have this whole concept? So the Rambam gives a reason. Dal pneumatik and shlema davar zeh. Why does shlema do this? Kadesh liyitu v'yeminu, so they don't make the following mistake. Shem shemut lohitzim min hachatzeres l'rechayves hamadina ushvaka olahachnes men lachatzeres. Assuming that you were talking about a whole city, so just like you can carry from your yard into the street, into the market, and vice versa. So so keep going, take it out of the city to the field, from the field to the city. And people's minds, they don't even think the streets are Rishus HaYachid. In their mind, the streets, there's no difference between a street and the fields outside the city, deserts. So in their mind, they're going to start thinking that really only a chatzir is a private domain. And why are we carrying into the streets? Must be that there is no malacha v'tzah. So they're going to get the whole foundation. They're going to get all the information wrong. So continuing this point, Therefore, if you have any Rishus HaYachid, which is then divided into separate homes, separate inhabitants, and each one says, "This is mine. This is my Rishus HaYachid. This is not your Rishus HaYachid." We have independent. We have distinct Rishus HaYachid. And then there remains a common area where they all have a part, such as the yard,
Like a condominium.
right? But really, any even a hallway in an apartment building,
Shared
is,
space.
yeah, anything. Which in a certain sense itself is reminiscent of a Rishus HaRabim in that multiple people are using common space. We will consider each specific location that each neighbor claims as his own as if it's the only Rishus HaYachid in a certain sense. So we're treating his truly Rishus HaYachid, the Rishus of the individual, differently than the Rishus of lots of individuals. So we're going to treat it like a Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaRabim dynamically. So then you're restricted, you only have, you're able to have free movement within the Rishus that's truly yours as a Yachid, and for the more common space, we need to make an Eruv. Alpha P Shakar Rishus Yachid, even though halachically it's all really one Rishus Yachid. Magen Mishnah says, "Divrei Rabbeinu b'tam takana shleima pshutim ubrudim heim u'uyim elav." Apparently, this is the Rambam's innovation. The Gemara never really came and explained. He says it's simple, it's clear, and worthy of the Rambam. The Rambam came up with it. Halacha Vav. So what is the Eruv? What exactly is it? What is it? So they're all combining, they're all mixing together within this one food item that they set aside before Shabbos. Kalaymar, as if to say, we're all mixed, we're all combined, and we all have one stash of food for all of us. And no one is truly claiming a particular space as his own and not his friends. Just like the common space is truly for everyone, so truly we can also have equal use of any spot, even the spot that I claim as my own. So it's all one big space, shared space for everyone. Every apartment, every room is one big shared space. And now, once you do this, now no one will ever come to be mistaken and imagine that you can simply carry from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, because even the shared space, we treat it like a Rishus HaRabim, and we forced you to make an Eruv. Halacha Zayin. So now there are two very similar but slightly different concepts with different names. If this is truly taking place inside a Chatzer, that's the term for that. But if it's on a larger scale, if it's a Mava, an alley with multiple Chatzeres, or a whole city, it's essentially not called an Eruv at all. So not only is calling the wire an Eruv not really technically correct, but using the term Eruv at all seems to be technically incorrect, because it's really a Shituf, Hu Anikra Shituf. Shitufim Evayos. And in the further halachas, you have to pay attention to Ram. When Ram says Ma'arvin, he's talking about an Eruv. When he says Mishtatfin, he's talking about the Shituf. And there will be some differences. Halacha, one major difference. Halacha Ches, the food and specific and the difference between Eruv and Shituf. In Ma'arv Mechatzeres, Elav Pashtem Levad. So when it comes to Eruv Chatzeres, it specifically needs to be bread, and has to be a complete loaf of bread. Even if it's a very, very, very large piece of bread, but it's a slice, it's not good. On the other hand, if it's complete and it's extremely small, you can still make an Eruv. So according to the Rambam, there is no real shear for the pass of Eruv Chatzeres.
As long as it's a complete loaf.
As long as it's complete. And the adds that just like you can use regular grains, so kach marvin the pas oires, it could be rice bread, pas adashim, lentil bread, avalei pas doichen, except for millet, because apparently that was really not something they made bread out of, so it wasn't considered bread. Shituf bein bepas v'mishar oichlin, and that was all Eruv. Now, what about shituf? Shituf could be either bread or other food. B'chol oichel mishtatfin, it could be any kind of food. Chutz min hamayim b'fnei atzman, a melach b'fnei atzman, unless it's just water alone or salt alone, that can't be used for the shituf. V'chein kamein upitrius, mushrooms and truffles, mishtatfin behen, can't be used either. She'enan chashuvin ka'oichelim, they aren't considered food, or they aren't considered respectable as food. Erev mayim and melach, if you mixed water with salt together, though, now it's a brine, but you could use it. So water alone, salt alone, not, but combined, and it's good for shituf. Now, what's the story here with the Eruv? What the Shlema and the Prusa? So the Mishnah says that the Gemara says it's Mishum Eva, that you don't have a scenario, because later we're going to talk about how the ideal setup of an Eruv is that everyone contributes something. So you don't have a scenario. One person says, "Oh, I'm giving a shlema, he's giving a prusa." People are feeling funny about who's contributing what. So therefore, everyone has to give a shlema. And then the question is, where it says, "What if everyone gave a prusa?" So now we're all equally no, because maybe it's going to end up going. Shiachs or dover l'kulkulay. You're going to have a race to the bottom. It's going to suddenly everyone is going to have a shlema, and then it's going to be uncomfortable again. And the Maggid Mishnah adds a point. He says that from the Gemara, it sounds like that if you have an entire loaf, you made a dough for a loaf, and it was going to be one large, and you took out the kedei chalasa, you separated the challah, and you pulled out that chunk, then in that case, ma'arvim boy, because there won't be any eva here. Go follow the reason. Let's follow the logic. Over here, the person will see, oh, it was really shlema, and the person was matakan, he took away the challah, so that should be okay. He says, however, the Rif doesn't mention it, the Ram doesn't mention it. Apparently, it was more or less mufurish in the Gemara, but the Rif and the Ram don't mention this detail about the section of the Challah missing, because either because it's not common, or maybe they had some other understanding of the Gemara that we don't know about. Halacha Tes. So we said that the shear we said Erev Chatzeres is bread and shituf can be anything. And we said the shear of the pas for an Erev is even Ki'isser. What about the shear for the shituf? Kama shear oichel shemishtatfim boy. What's the shear there? There's already a set shear. Gegaris, l'chol achad, be'achad, be'bnei ha'mavei, oy mi'bnei ha'medina. You need the size of a gegaris, a dried fig, of food for any member of the Mavai or the city. When we say we need a single gegaris for each person, that's if they're 18 or fewer. But if there's more than that, more than 18, then we freeze the share at the share of 2 meals, which translates into 18 individual portions. That's the equivalent of 18 figs. Beitzim Beinonius, which is equivalent to the share of 6 average eggs. So as we know from the Rambam from previously as well, according to the Rambam Shita, a gegaris is a third of a beitza, so that's why 18 to 6. And even if there's thousands, tens of thousands, we freeze it at 18 gregaris, the 2 sodas.
For each person?
No, for everyone together.
Oh, for everyone. Up
till 18, you have a gegaris for each person, and from 18 and on, you just leave it at 18, which is Jay Sodas.
What's shituf again? And
shituf is just the same thing, but for a larger group, not just a chatzar, but for an alley, a mavai, or for a city.
A city too?
We said Medina, yeah. It's called the Sha'is and Ansha Mavi Zem Ze Oy Kol B'nei Medina. Why Nikra Shituf? Also here in Halacha Tes, it said
so why would you need for the city? Why would you need another type of an area if you have shituf?
No, first you need to have the mechitza,
and then you do shituf.
Then you're shesayachid. Then you have the Shlomo Melech's problem. You solve that by doing the shituf. First, you have to be Rosh Hashanah according to the rules.
So then, when you have, let's say, an Erev, one of the neighborhoods, they have to do shituf too.
Yeah, someone somewhere has to have something. Yeah.
Yeah, they carry them.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying is that's the thing. They do shituf also. So everybody has to chip in or whatever.
But then we'll see later. You could end up being mezaka for other people. So I guess that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, right.
Although as we'll see, the Alter Rebbe still says that the minig, at least in smaller areas, was that everyone contributed something. We'll see when we get there. Halacha. So that was halacha tes. So now we're up to halacha yud. So now we start getting into individual kwas shitov. Could be any type of food. So and there's a specific shear, unlike the pas for an Erev. So we're going to start getting down into some of the details on that. So we said mazon shtei seudos. What does that mean? So any food that's eaten as is, going pas, sumine dog, going basar chai, so bread or grain or raw meat. So if you choose one of those as your food, as the item for your shitov, then like we said, it has to be for 2 meals. Lift on. But if it's a dip and you don't eat it directly, you dip your bread in it. What's a dip? Cooked wine, basar tzali, roasted meat, v'chaymet, vinegar, murias, brine, v'zeisim, olives, v'imoy, shel b'tzalim, onion heads, shiurei kadei, lachol boy, shtei seudos. So then it's not the shear of shtei seudos, it's the shear that you would need to eat with shtei seudos. So whatever the measurement of a dip is for shtei seudos. And now in Hilchos we get down into many specifics, just specific examples. But before that, two things that aren't mentioned in the next halacha that were mentioned here. The chaymetz, the Maggid says that Rashba says he thinks the shear of the chaymetz for vegetables for 2 seudos would be a revius. And he also thinks that when the Rambam mentioned yayin mevushal, it doesn't mean literally that you dip in yayin mevushal, but it's like a small, I don't know if the term is an aperitif, or it's just something small that comes towards the end of the meal, not as a dish in its own right. So the shear in that case, don't measure how much wine you would dip in, measure how much wine you would bring at the end to take a sip. Halacha Yud Aleph. So now we're getting into the specifics. So nishtat for b'yayin chai. So if it's regular wine, which is not cooked and not diluted, shiurei shtei reviyos lekulan. So that's 2 reviyos for everyone. V'chein, so that's like shtei seudos. V'chein b'shechar shtei reviyos for beer as well. 2 reviyos. Beitzim shtayim, 2 eggs. Umshtatim and afilu hin chayas, and you can even use the eggs as raw. You don't have to cook the eggs for the shitov. Rimoinim shtayim, 2 pomegranates. Esrig echad, 1 esrig is enough. Hamisha agayzim, 5 nuts. Hamisha farsikin, 5 peaches. Litra yarak, like a pound. A litra is the Roman equivalent of a pound. I'm not saying it's the exact same shear, but the kind of unit. So a litra of vegetables, ben chai ben shal, doesn't matter whether the vegetables are cooked or not. But if it's neither here nor there, not fully cooked or not uncooked, then that's not edible.
So why are you permitting eggs, raw eggs then?
Apparently raw eggs were edible. We also mentioned raw meat.
People eat
yeah. Uchla. Now we're going to use a bunch of shiurim. Also, you use the liter, and halach yubez and halach gimel. The Ram is actually going to take the time to give some rules about how all the shiurim relate to each other. So we're throwing around some terminology here. So an uchla of tavalin. So if you're using spices for your shituf, it's an uchla amount. Kav tamarim. If it's dates, it's a kav. Kav gregoris. If it's dried figs, it's a kav. Mana devela. If it's crushed figs, it's the shear of a mana. Kav tapuchen, apples, a kav. Kshus, which is some kind of parasitic plant that grows. It's called something similar in English. Kuskuda. Kamloi hayad, a handful. Pailan lachen, fresh beans. Kamloi hayad, a handful. Chazin, litra. Chazin is another plant, a liter of that. Batrad and hareim mechal yarak, and beets are considered a vegetable. Marvin, you can use them as well. Ale b'tsalem, onion leaves, in ma'arvim ben ela im ivtzilu. You can't use it unless it actually turned into an onion, already ripened as an onion. But nasa eidach kol ola mehen zaras, and the length of each leaf is at least the length of a finger, a hand. But less than that, it hasn't
like
fully ripened.
Like a scallion, then the green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And everything we just said in this halacha, the whole point is that we're not treating it like because in that case, we already said it's 18 Gregorius. So we're giving all these other shiurim because they're all treated as lifton. There's some kind of incidental ingredient to the meal. So now they sat and they made shiurim for each one. What's the appropriate amount that would fit for 2 meals? That's what we got to do shiurim. Yeah, exactly. So you'd have to figure out how much ketchup do you need for 2 meals exactly.
Condiments.
Yeah. And you can, in fact, you can actually mix. You can take, have part of an esrog and some nuts, and as long as it all combines somehow to the shir of this. Halacha Yud Beis, and here the Rambam. This is very important to anyone who's interested in the Rambam shiurim. This is where the Rambam lays it all out. Halacha Yud Beis and Halacha Yud Gimel. Litra ha'amura b'chol makom maloi shtei reviyos. Whenever we say a litra, that is equivalent to 2 reviyos. V'uchla, whenever we mention an uchla, chatzi reviyos, that's half a reviyos.
His litra is not the word for liter.
That's the same word. It's definitely the same word, but the word, these types of words, even like the word or coins, dinars, it can change from country to country, from era to era. So the word itself doesn't help you so much. You have to have other evidence of. So often you'll see the Rambam's going to mention later sa'iris. Often, when you want to break down measurements, you break it down to how many grains of barley, and if you have that, so then you can build from there. Yeah, even shiurim in Europe, the Alter Rebbe, I think it says Alter Rebbe measured grains next to each other. The question was, should they be lying flat? Should they be on their side? Lots of discussions, of course, when it comes to shiurim. Many svarim on that. We're going to keep it relatively simple. So an ochla is half a reviyos, umana hamura b'chol makom, and we mentioned the mana earlier, or wherever we mention it, it's mea dinar, 100 dinar. Ve'a dinar sheish ma'in, a dinar is 6 ma. Ve'a ma'a mishkal sheish esrei sa'iris, and here we get to the barley. A ma'a is 16 grains of barley. Ve'a sela, and if you mention a sela, so that's arba dinarim. That's 4 dinar, which each dinar is 6 ma, and each ma is 16 grains of barley. And if you want to convert the reviyos, which is a measure of liquid, to weight, so how reviyos, machzak, so right, litra, reviyos and uchla were all measurements of volume, of liquid. And then we just went through mana, dinner, ma, soiris, that's measurements of weight. Now the Rambam is going to tell you how to convert. For reviyos, machzakas min hamayim min hayayin, a reviyos, if you could fill a space of a reviyos with water or wine, the water or wine that would fill that space is mishkal shiva asar dinar and b'chatzi dinar b'kerev. It would weigh approximately 17.5 dinar. Nimtis halitra. So based on that, if a reviyos is 17.5, so a litra, which is 2 reviyos, nimtis halitra mishkal chamisha shleishim dinar. So litra is double. It's 35. V'ochlo, which we said is half. So that's half of 17.5. Mishkal tisha dinar and pachas reviyah. So it's 8 3/4. 9 minus a quarter. Halacha Yud Gimel. Sa'ah hamura b'chol makom sheishes kabin. So these are measurements of volume of solids. So a sa'ah is 6 kav. Kav arba'as lugin, and the kav is 4 lug. V'aleg arba reviyos, and we ended up with liquid again. So the lug is 4 reviyos. That's why reviyos is called reviyos, because it's a quarter of a lug. Korbayarnu midas reviyos mishkala, and we just told you about the reviyos a second ago. And this is what you should always remember. You bookmark this Rambam, and you're good. So the Maggid Mishnah comments here, and he says, I want to point out that the Gemara never mixed. There are certain things the Gemara talks about weight. We can assume, but generally, when it came to food and drink, the Gemara measured it in measurements of volume, and the Gemara never translates that into weight. Why is that? He says because really, we know that. I mean, this comes up with the shaila of matzah, kazayas matzah. Do you measure it as airy matzah? Do you crumble it into crumbs?
Yeah.
Because the different things that fill a similar amount of space don't necessarily really contain the same volume, so they weigh very differently. So if you took because if you just want to buy the shape, a kazayas of one thing and a kazayas of another thing would weigh very differently, even if they're from one mint. Because the Goinim were the ones who pioneered this type of discussion. They took the average of each thing and they weighed it, and they said that's the weight. And he says that Rambam was one of these people. And you see in the Pirsha Mishnayos and Menachos, he says that the Rambam says, I was trying to figure out the measurement for challah, and he came up with this and this amount of kamach mitzrayim. Specifically, he was using Egyptian flour. And we'll see also in Hilchos Bikurim and Hilchos Shar Ma'anas Kahuna. He says the Goinim, why did the Goinim do this? The Goinim did this because, at least for nowadays, it's just easier to speak in terms of weight than in terms of volume. We just weigh things already since the Goinim. People just wanted to know, how do I weigh it? And you see clearly in their tshuvas that it's not in the Gemara, but they're trying to work it out, trying to figure it out. And then the Maggid Mishnah says, Maggid Mishnah lived in Spain, l'chayra. So the Maggid Mishnah said that the 16 grains of barley that the Rambam mentions is like half an aragint, which it's seemingly some kind of Spanish currency. I didn't find any contemporary mention of it, but it sounds like maybe related to the state of Aragon that used to be in the Spanish territory. So anyway, that coin over there, so half of it is 16 se'eres, so you can convert into the Spanish weights. Of course, the discussion continues till today. I believe according to Chaim Noah, Revius is about 2.9 ounces. So you can, if you want to Google what is the size, what typical object is 3 ounces, you can convert it to some kind of common weight today, or else just use, not today. Back then you had to measure against something else. You needed to put the coin on the other side of the scale. Today you just need to know the number, and the scale tells you the number. Halacha Yudalid and Tesvav. What if the food is not mutter to a specific person? So if the food is inherently mutter, even though the person doing the Eruv, he's not allowed to eat it, he can participate, it's fine. Mishtatif hu nazir, and now we switch to mishtatif because he wants to use examples that are in bread, so that's not eruv, that's shituf. Mishtatif hu nazir b'yayin the Yisrael b'truma. The nazir could be part of a shituf involving wine, even though he can't drink wine. The Yisrael could be part of a shituf involving truma, even though Yisrael can't eat truma. Or someone who promises or swears not to eat it, ma'arav boy, mishtatif boy, he can still participate. If it's not good for him, it's good for someone else. Again, continuing Halachat Tezvav, but if it's something that no one can eat, like tevel, I feel tevel shall divrei seifrim, even if it's just tevel midrabanan. Or if it's meiser, where you didn't take the truma of the meiser yet properly. Or if it's meiser sheni and hektish, where you're supposed to convert it into cash, and then you can continue using the object, but you didn't actually convert it properly. So that's also for everyone, so they can't be used. But you could use the mai, which is the amar, it's the suffix we took of meiser, because the din is that poor people are allowed to eat the mai. But sheniftu, and if there was a pidyon, even though you didn't add the additional fifth, that is not ma'akev it from being kosher. And you may recall a lot of these things also from Shabbos, Perek Chav Hey, we had this like muktzah and tiltal, and we said that the things that are totally asur, they're muktzah, to carry them. What can you do with it? It's not eichel. And the other things, let's say meiser sheni v'hektish, where you didn't have the fifth yet, so it's not ma'akev, so you can be metaltal. That was where we had that. Ma'arvim meiser sheni b'Yerushalayim, and meiser sheni, which you're actually, this is the meiser sheni that you're going to use. So you're allowed to use it for your Eiruvin Yerushalayim, you're allowed to use it there, but not outside of Yerushalayim, because there it's not edible. Halacha Tes Zayin. So how do you actually do the Eruv, the Seder of making an Eruv? How do you do that in the Chatzar? So you go and collect complete challah from each house, like we said before, it has to be complete, doesn't matter what size. And we're working with the assumption for now that everyone's contributing. And it's all in one bowl, in one house, in one of the houses. It doesn't actually have to be a residential. It could be a room where they keep the the grain, they keep the animals, stuff like the straw. But if it's just like the guard house, where the guard stands, something like that, even if it belongs to a particular person, Chsadra is like the Greek architecture with pillars, and mirpases is a porch for standing on top. Or the room doesn't have 4x4 amas, then it's not good. It has to be in a place that we can call a bias. And after you gather the Eruv, mevarech the bracha baruch Hashem Kamelech Ha'olam Asher Kedushanim Tzeitzit Tzivanu Al Mitzvahs Eruv. But Eruv Zeh, and then you have a lashon. It's in Aramaic and in Gemara, and then I think in the Siddurim, but the Rambam just says in Hebrew. Eruv Zeh Yimut L'Chol Bnei Achatz Lahitzi Lahachnes V'Bayis L'Bayis B'Shabbos. You utter, you exclaim that this will be the Eruv that makes it mutter for everyone to carry from house to house. A child is able to collect it. Even though that's really the act of Eruv, is the collection, but the child can do it. And the house, the place where you're actually putting the Eruv, they don't have to contribute. And if there's a place that they always put the Eruv in that place, so you shouldn't change it going forward, because they don't have to give any bread. They just give the space. So they might not appreciate being told that, oh, we're taking it out of your space, and now you have to give bread instead. You leave it. Apparently, it could get touchy. The Ravid comments here. The Ravid says that where we are, when it comes to Erev Chatzos, what we do is we don't go around collecting loaves of bread. We go around collecting a little flour. Everyone gives a small amount of flour from each house, and then we bake it into one matzah, and then we keep the matzah the whole year. So they hold that when it said kikar shalem, it meant kikar shalem for everyone. And then he adds the MS. If everyone gives a prusa, then it's not going to be good. And he holds that you need a gregaris for everyone, even in Erev Chatzeres. He disagrees with the Rambam on that whole concept that Erev just could be even Isser. So the Maggid Mishnah comments on the first point. The Maggid Mishnah says, I saw as well that they're Mekayim, they approve of this minhag to collect the flour and make one big challah. Where we are as well. I'm not sure how far the Maggid Mishnah was from where they're at, different era, but generally relatively close. And he says the Chreinim in his time, which are our Rishonim, agreed. And he says the Gemara doesn't mention, the Rambam doesn't mention one way or the other, so he doesn't see how the Rambam would disagree with that necessarily. The Alter Rebbe Siddur also, you look at the Alter Rebbe Siddur, small paragraph, Erev Chatzeres, the Alter Rebbe writes, Nagu lekabetz kamach mikol bayis ubayis be'erev Pesach. That was the set time. Va'isen matzah acha shlema. Ma'arvin bo lekol shabses hashana. So once a year of Pesach, you took the flour, you made the matzah.
It lasts for the whole year.
It lasts for the whole year. Yeah, the Ravid mentioned that, and the Alter Rebbe mentions that. Lekol shabses hashana. Now, on the point that the Ravid mentioned that he holds that it does have to have the shear of the Gregoris for each one, presumably up to Shtei Seudas. So the Maggid Mishnah says, yeah, the Ravid and other Rishonim hold that you need a shear even b'kikor shalem for Erev Chatzeres, and it's the same thing. The Gregoris, the Mazon Shtei Seudas. There's a Mishnah that says clearly kikor ke'isar v'hu shalem. It says clearly that the kikor has to be ke'isar. So they said, yeah, the kicker in Shleimus could be the size of an Isser, but you still need lots of kikaras until you have a kikaras for each person. But he says the Ram goes the Mishnah Kapshutai that if it's Isser, then each house can contribute the kicker the size of an Isser, even if it's not a kikaras. And he seems to think the Goyim were more in the Rambam's camp. And there's a lot more from the Mefarshim on different points in this halacha. We're going to keep it light. Halacha Yud Zayin v'ketza mishtatzim b'mavoi, and how do you do the shituf if it's a larger space, a mavoi? So goyva oichel. In this case, it's not bread; it's food. Kagregaras shir, like the Rambam says, b'kolach v'achad from each one. Or less if it's really many more people. So then you don't really have to collect a full gregaras from everyone. The total is just the final total has to be 18. So you can put it all. You put it all in a keli. It has to be in one of the chatzeres, or in a house in a chatzer. I feel the bias and in this case, even if it's smaller than dollar al or it's an achsadra, it's a porch, it's a shituf, it's still good. But if it's just somehow in the air, not resting on something, in a shituf, and if you put it in a keli in the chatzar like bia haklim and a karka tavach, you have to pick it up a tavach kadeshi nicker, so it's you can tell that this is what it is. Mavarech al mitzvahs eruv, and you make the same bracha. Va'emer bezah shituf, and just the language, the statement is a little different, mostly similar. Bezah shituf mutter lekol b'nei hamavay lahitzi lahachnis b'chatzeres lamavay v'shabbos, from the chatzar to the mavay. Halacha yud ches. You said that you put it all in one kli. What if it's not all in one kli? What if the food got divided? Even if it's in one general location, one room, it's not good. But if the quantity filled a whole keli up, and there's some that doesn't fit, and you spilled over, you put in another keli, but that's okay. Halacha yud tes. Do you need both? If you have a mavoi, do you also need to make an eruv in the chatzah? So I'm starting the mavoi. Tzrichen la'arav b'chatzeres. You still have to make an eruv chatzeres in the individual chatzeres. Shakeh hatinoikas teres eruv. We want the children to forget what an eruv is. She'ena tinoikas makinim manasam mavoi. Kids know what's going on in the chatzah. They don't know what's going on in the mavoi. So you have to do both. It's like important. Like the tinoikas should know what's going on. Same kind. However, even though shituf matvayas could be with any food, but if you happen to use bread for the shituf, for the whole mavay, that's good enough for the chatzeres as well. You don't have to make another eruv. The children are aware; they know what bread is. Somehow that they know. If we have a group of people all together in one house, and suddenly Shabbos arrives, if there's bread on the table, we say, you know what? This is the eruv for all of us. We're all here. This bread represents all of us. And if you want to use it for shituf, it's also even if you're outside. As we said, the eruv chatzeres has to be inside a house. The shituf could even be outside in a chatzar. So if you're outside in a chatzar, it could be shituf also. It could be shituf if it's in the chatzar. It can't be an eruv if it's in the chatzar, and if it's in the house, it could be either one. Halacha chaf, being mezaka for others. So here's where we get to the halacha, where essentially, even if you don't go around collecting, you can make the eruv or the shituf. If one member took bread, he said, this is for on behalf of everyone. Or he took any type of food with a shear. This is for everyone in the whole mavai. You don't have to collect anymore. But you need to use another person's participation and do like a kinyan from the two people, and that way you're kind of makna on behalf of everyone. He could do it using his adult son or daughter. A Jewish slave, his wife, but not through his non-adult sons and daughters. Non-Jewish slaves and maids, they're just an extension of him, so he didn't really use another party here. He could also use his Jewish maid, even though technically she actually is a minor, because Amar has to be a minor. Because cotton could be zeicha for others if it's just midrabanan. But and he doesn't even have to let them know that he was mezaka and he was ma'arif. Because he's doing a schus, he's doing a benefit for them. You can carry out acts for another person without their knowledge, without their presence, if it's a schus, if it's something that's to their benefit. Halacha chavalef, almost finished. Halacha chavalef. We can't do this on Shabbos itself. It has to be before. And you're even allowed to do it during that in between time. We're not really sure if it's there at night. And the eruv and the shituf has to be around through the bein hashmashos that precedes that given Shabbos. Therefore, all of Gal, If a wave crashed on it, I got lost, or nisif, got burned. I show truma v'nitmis about yoyim, or is truma which is edible, but then it became tamei and you can't eat it. Any erev, you didn't actually have an erev when Shabbos set in. But if it happened once Shabbos set in, how is erev because you were mu'urav as Shabbos arrived? That's all that matters. Bim safek, and if you're not sure, how is erev? It's still an erev. She's fake erev kosher because safek erev is also kosher. I believe this principle may even be used sometimes by the mechitzas themselves. I didn't have a chance to look up exactly how that applies, but sometimes, as long as you know the erev was up, the string, whatever was up before Shabbos, sometimes you can, you don't have to go to look. Though I think if you do know that it's not, then you might.
Then you're not supposed to.
Yeah, halacha chav beis. Final halacha. And also, erev yeshitav v'migdal v'nol alav. You put it in a tower, in a closet, and you locked it. And you lost the key before Shabbos set in. And if the only way to extract it would be to do malacha during that time of Bein Hashmashos, it is a kamisha ava. That's like losing it. But any erev doesn't count. Can't be eaten. The test is whether it could be eaten at that time. Let's say you separated the Trumas Meiser, you separated the Truma Gedola, so to not solve the problem. But the Hisna Allah, Shlaitia Truma Achatachshach, when you made a condition that it's not actually, my act is not going to kick in until the Shabbos actually fully sets in. It's no good. Because from the moment that it counted, it was still considered Tevel, but it has to be worthy and edible while it's still day going into Shabbos. And that was not the case in this instance.
Yeah.